Hello everybody and welcome to my first look and test flight of the DCS Gazelle SA342 by Polychop. Quick disclaimer, I've never flown a chopper, so I'm basing the experience on the existing 3 choppers in DCS. Why are my pilots asleep? Well, the external model looks great, so there are no faults there. Let's get inside and get her started up. Internally, the cockpit instruments and controls look just as good. This is the standard chopper configuration in DCS, so by alternating between 1 and 2 you can switch between the pilot and weapons officer. The weapons officer looks kind of shifty, I just don't trust him. Okay, let's get this beastie started up and hopefully off the ground. First of all, test out your collective lever, cyclic and rudders to make sure your controls are working. Additionally, I reversed the direction of my throttle in settings to make it operate more like a collective lever. Once you're fully satisfied everything's working, it's time to start clicking buttons and switches like a maniac until something actually happens. The first switches we flip are the electrics, of course: battery, alternator and generator. The next thing I always do, if you've ever seen any of my videos, is turn on the lights. Nothing worse than straining to look at instruments. As you can see, there are 2 sets of illumination controls, one on the right and the other one towards the kind of center left of the control panel. There are also still a few switches which do absolutely nothing. Before we begin cranking the engine, let's get our doors closed. Okay, the next thing we need to do is turn on the fuel pump. Now you can see it's in French, so arrête means stop, marcher means go. Please remember that. Wait 20 seconds, then push the starter switch up to on or marcher. You'll see a green and orange light illuminate. Then look up to your left and release the rotor brake. To release the rotor brake, push it all the way up and forward. Now pay particular attention to your RPM gauge. There are 2 hands. The large hand is for your turbine RPM and the small hand is for your rotor RPM. This is important to remember this. As the turbine RPM climbs and reaches about 12 o'clock or 30,000 RPM, slowly release your fuel flow lever. Now just slowly move it forward until you see your rotor beginning to turn. Now back to your RPM gauge and wait for the small hand to reach the big hand. So the big hand is about 45,000 RPM and you can see the small hand starting to climb. You can also turn on your dust filter at this point as we're in the desert. I've also just turned on the pitot switch. Here we're waiting for the small hand or rotor RPM to catch up and sync with the turbine RPM. As soon as that happens, we can then look back up to our left again and we can push the fuel flow lever fully forward, as so. The next stop is back to the control column and engage the magnetic brake. You can see here it's slightly just to the left and above the RPM gauge. Once that's done, look across to the left of the control column and set the gyro switch to center or GM. Go back to the bottom right of your control panel and turn on your autopilot, pitch and yaw. These are very similar to your stability augmentation systems in the A10C for those who have that. You'll now notice that all of the lights on your warning panel have turned off and also your alarm light has turned off. So let's just test the warning panel to make sure it's working, and we'll finish off the startup by turning on the trim switch. It's a good habit to get into then turning on your RW or threat warning system. Push in the button on your attitude indicator and hold that button in until the indicator fully stabilizes. When it's fully stabilized and no longer shaking, go across to your standby attitude indicator and push in the button while rolling your mouse back to set the horizon level. Move down to your radar altimeter. Use the knob on the bottom left of the radar altimeter to uncage it, and then use the knob on the top right to set your minimum altitude level, so it will warn you if you dip below that level. The next part is completely optional and not related to startup. The only reason I'm doing it is to stop my weapons officer from going slightly nuts and turning rapey on my pilot once we get off the ground. So switch on your TV here, change that to day, which is jour in French, and then flick a couple of switches up the top. I haven't really paid too much attention to them until your TV comes on. Eventually it will if you click enough. You can zoom in and out more or less instantly using the targeting system, but it takes about a minute or 2 to warm up so you can actually move the camera around. Okay, let's get back to the thing I've been putting off: takeoff. The flight model in this aircraft doesn't feel quite right yet. It's a little bit jumpy. It doesn't seem to have the incremental control you get from the Huey or the Mi-8, or more comparable in the weight category, the Black Shark. This is most noticeable and lethal during takeoff and landing. So what I'm going to do here is slowly just raise my skids off the ground and kind of use my rudder just to spin the aircraft into the air. It's not the most elegant takeoff, but it's effective and I don't end up careering into the buildings to my left. Gaining effective control of the aircraft takes a little bit of time. I feel the rudders are just way too strong on this aircraft. They're way too sensitive. The other major issue with the flight model I find is the trim controls. You adjust them a tiny bit and they're just not incremental. They're quite radical in the results you get. Additionally, it doesn't seem to matter if the autopilot or the stability systems are either on or off. I get the same results either way. If this is how the Gazelle flies in real life, then fair enough, we'll have to learn how to fly it correctly. But I suspect if it were to fly like this in real life, we'd be hearing about a lot more Gazelle accidents. The rudder in its current state makes it quite difficult to perform coordinated turns. As you shall see here, I just veer from left to right down the Las Vegas Strip, like some kind of Uber village drunk on payday. I suspect that this has a lot to do with my complete inexperience with the aircraft. But I do feel the rudder is just way too strong, and I feel that the stability systems don't kick in the way they should. In fact, they just seem to have no effect. With all that I've just said, I must point out that this is day one of the release, and this aircraft is in early access. The use of the term early access is something within DCS that I'm somewhat at odds with. Previously, DCS modules used more specific terms such as alpha and beta. Even though those terms can be quite vague, you know a little bit more about where you stand with those terms. I feel that using the word early access, which has become quite fashionable elsewhere, is a bit like visiting your grandmother and her advice being, YOLO motherfucker! It just doesn't feel quite right in DCS. I must state that in spite of all that I've said, Polychop have done an amazing job. This is their first effort, and this is a first day release. It's still in alpha or beta or whatever they want to call early access, and in spite of that, compared to any other first day releases I've encountered, this aircraft is much more complete. It's fun to fly, even though I don't feel the flight model is quite right, it still is really fun to fly, and it delivers that sense of realistic flight and momentum that one expects from DCS. So to the guys at Polychop, I'd say magnificently done. You're doing really great things, and I expect even greater things from you in the future. This is absolutely brilliant. Now we move on to the community and whether or not I would advise you buy this module. And that very much depends on you and your personality type. There are certain realities of DCS that don't seem to have sunk in with some members of the community. The major one being that aircraft take years to complete. So aircraft remain in alpha or beta state for up to 2-3 years in some cases, but definitely a period of months. So if you're an impatient person who wants it complete and complete now, and is going to piss and whine and moan all over the forums for months and years to come until it is, don't buy it now. Please fucking don't. Wait, I'll even pay you not to buy it. If on the other hand you're willing to accept the early access state, and you enjoy the fact that the aircraft continues to improve over weeks, months, or in some cases years, then I think you should buy it. It's a great aircraft, it's great fun. The one complaint I do have just here at the end is that despite a rough landing and the aircraft catching fire, the physics are off. This is like a prescriptive moment where it just turns over on its side. Anyway, I thank you very, very much for watching, and please don't forget to comment or subscribe below. Thank you very much, and goodbye.